Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Hi, Stacey.
Brad Stone, welcome to Everybody's Business. Thank you so much for filling in for Max Chafkin as he is whisked off to the Alps, from what I understand.
Right, and not as a competitor, I don't think, but as a spectator.
Yeah, I think he is actually going to see some Olympic events.
And he's missed a crazy week, right? Just a brutal week and a reckoning in the world of AI.
Yes, investors in a lot of big software companies, including Salesforce, Oracle, ServiceNow, they have been kind of swept up in this panic that's happening in the industry. And even while all of this is happening and all of these reckonings are coming down, there is still no question in anybody's mind that there is a lot of opportunity and money to be made in AI.
Right. And speaking of wealth, there's something surprising happening in the conversations about it. California and New York City are having a kind of brutal debate over how we tax wealth.
People who earn money pay very high taxes, whereas people who have money don't.
That's Ray Madoff. And Stacey, we're going to speak with her today about the way we tax or don't tax the very rich in this country.
And after that, we're going to switch gears a little bit because before Max left, he and I had a conversation about Generation Alpha. That is the topic of the latest issue of Businessweek. Particularly, we tend to think of Gen Alphas as a very on-screen generation. But as it turns out, they are a lot more skeptical than we might think.
Don't doom scroll, kids. Horrible poison for your brain.
This is Everybody's Business from Bloomberg Businessweek. I'm Stacey Vanek Smith.
And I'm Brad Vanek Stone.
I welcome you into the Vanek clan. For this week's discussion, we're going to fire up the LLM and look at the effect of AI on the economy. But first, Brad, let's take a look at the headlines. As we mentioned, we're seeing a different kind of AI panic. One by one, sector after sector is being pushed by this sell-off in the markets.
Right. Travel services, financial services, legal services, software as a service. It's all being slowly eaten away by fears that AI tools are going to render these companies useless.
I mean, what's so interesting to me about this is that we really don't know how things are going to shake out yet. I mean, these are just very early days, but the panic seems to be about the speculation almost as much as all the exuberance was about the speculation.
I totally agree. It's vibes-based, as we say on this show.
It is vibes-based, yes.
Right. I mean, we know AI automates routine work. They can handle workflows and coding. But, I mean, the idea that it displaces data governance, security, compliance, vendor support, all the things that these companies, Oracle, Salesforce, ServiceNow, do so well. I mean, it feels far-fetched to me and more a market reaction than an underlying reality.
I feel like we're seeing this effect of AI in so many parts of the economy, though. I feel like it's the same exact thing in the job market. There's just so much speculation about, I think there's an enormous amount of promise. You're really in the heart of it where you are, Brad.
Yeah.
But there's so much promise and excitement over what AI can do and so much fear about what it's going to do as well. It's just really interesting to me, kind of the emotional arc of AI in our economy right now. And it's easy to write off vibes, I think, as being sort of silly or ephemeral. But, I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars being like sucked out of the economy because of fears or just pumped into the economy because of excitement. It's a strange time.
It's a weird moment. And part of it is the fears of kind of AI disruption. And part of it is simply the sheer scale of the capital investments that are being made as these companies build out data centers, enter into costly partnerships with companies like NVIDIA, or simply do the work to build up their own AI agents and try to integrate them into their core products.
It reminds me of back when I was a reporter at Marketplace. One of my beats was big data, back when big data was a beat. And what everyone kept saying to me over and over was, I don't know, did you ever see Minority Report?
Of course.
Do you remember the scene when Tom Cruise is running through the mall and there are all these holograms being projected by these different brands?
Yeah, very
They're
personalized.
They're like, it's time to replace your whatever, Nike Pegasus, or like, would you like a Rolex, or whatever it is. And everyone kept saying that is happening. Like, that is just around the corner. And it never happened. Like, it still hasn't really happened. I mean, it happened in a different way. And I think about that moment all the time right now because I feel like that is happening with AI, but there's so much money behind it now and so many market forces behind it. It seems like it's really kind of shaking the foundations of our economy in a really profound way. And, in another development this week, Brad, these AI companies are now setting their sights, of course, on deeper pockets, the U.S. government. I feel like all big business eventually turns its gaze. It's like the Jupiter of the finance world, right, as the largest gravitational pull. Everybody wants a U.S. government contract. But now there is a lot of excitement and investment around developing autonomous weapons and also using AI in service of kind of mass surveillance. And now there's a big discussion about putting protections in place around that as well.
Right. This week, we saw Anthropic talking to the U.S. government about extending its Claude contract, SpaceX talking about competing in a Pentagon contest to produce voice control autonomous drone swarming technology. And Stacey, the interesting thing here is how at odds these potential relationships are with some of the core values that fueled at least some of the AI companies. Anthropic, of course, OpenAI, whose founding mission was to benefit humanity. They're going to the Pentagon. They're trying to draw some lines around the relationship. I don't know how successful that will be.
Voice control drones is very frightening because I feel like when I have tried to interact with AI via voice controls, it just doesn't often go that well. And the stakes in this case are really low. It's like, a recipe for chicken or something. But if we're talking about drone strikes, it just seems like the Department of War needs to get it right.
And Stacey, one more development this week.
Yes.
NPR host David Green suing Google for using a likeness of his voice in its product Notebook LM. Now, you're a longtime radio personality. David
True.
Green says that is his voice. It's his intonations and filler words. What do you think?
This is interesting. I mean, I feel like there's quite a bit of crossover here between, the debate happening in Hollywood over people's likenesses. I do think it's true. I mean, this happened at NPR in other iterations as well. I remember there was a bunch of excitement over an AI launch that used a voice that sounded very similar to Steven Skeep's voice. And it was a podcast that would generate itself if you said, like, hey, I want to learn about, any fiber and the importance of fiber in your diet in a podcast form. And then they would have an Inskeepian-like voice interviewing a reporter, and it would just immediately generate it. So when I was at NPR, we were both sort of delighted and excited by this because it was just so funny how fast it was able to put it together. But it did feel kind of terrifying. And the point that I had a colleague make, and I think this is a really good one, and to answer your question, is that, the reason they're using Steven Skeep's voice or David Green's voice is because there's a lot of sort of authority in that voice. And that's from a lot of years of reporting and, trying to get it right. And a lot of hours and time and investment went into that credibility.
And we should say Google insists it's a paid actor, but it's hard to believe it's a total coincidence.
It is hard to believe it's a total coincidence. I mean, this happened with Scarlett Johansson's voice too, right? Like they appropriated that. I mean, I think because we have associations with these voices, and I feel like for us as humans, like we hear voices before we're even born. Like this is very primal for us, and we have very emotional associations with voices. It is a little tricky when an AI can just generate a voice you trust. I mean, imagine if it's like a family member or, someone you absolutely look up to or someone you absolutely hate, and just like the emotions that get evoked around that voice telling you something. I think it is quite powerful and is definitely worth a look. And I'm glad this lawsuit is happening because I think it will force a deeper dive. Because in this country, like that's how things happen, right? Via litigation. Brad Stone, you have a big story running in this issue of Businessweek. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yes.
It is about taxes, but it's super exciting and interesting. I feel like some people don't always think that about
Nothing more
tax-related
interesting
stories.
than taxes, right? I wrote the opening essay of our March issue, How to Tax a Trillionaire. You may have heard, Stacey, California tearing itself to pieces over a proposal, a one-time tax of 5% on wealthy families with over $1.1 billion in assets. This has not even qualified for the ballot yet, but politicians are coming out for and against. Billions are being raised by super PACs to fight it.
People have threatened to leave the state.
And that's it. Famous founders, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Mark Zuckerberg, buying homes and establishing residences outside the state.
This is a fascinating topic, and certainly one that has been really top of mind, I think, for the last few years now, as people have discussed wealth and the disparity between the wealthy and lower income people getting wider in this country. And we are very lucky to have someone you spoke with for your article, Ray Madoff, professor at Boston College Law School and author of The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. Ray, welcome to Everybody's Business.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with both of you.
So, Ray, you wrote the book on how we tax or how we don't tax billionaires.
Yeah.
I really relied on you as I reported out this story. So tell us, what do you think of wealth tax proposals like the one in California?
It's interesting because wealth tax proposals are, in some ways, an obvious solution to the current situation. The current problem that we have now is that the wealthiest Americans have found many easily available, effective ways to avoid the income tax. And when they avoid the federal income tax, they also avoid the state income tax. And so wealth taxes seem to provide the perfect response to this problem, which is fine. Let's just tax their wealth. The problem is, like a lot of solutions, the devil is in the details. They might work in theory, but I am very concerned about their ability to work in practice.
So this might seem like kind of an obvious question, but I think it is quite interesting. When we talk about taxing someone's wealth as opposed to their income, what do we mean? And why is this a solution that people like to talk about when dealing with the wealth or the income gap in the U.S.?
Yeah. And I think the answer is because of the failure to tax income. I'm going to start on the income side because I think that's the tax that most people are most familiar with, right? Most people who are well off because they get salaries and other forms of taxable income. And the more taxable income you get, the higher taxes you pay. The thing is, for our richest Americans, all these guys in Silicon Valley, they have found ways of avoiding taxable income. And they do it by following what I call the tax avoidance playbook. And the first step is they avoid salaries. So all these guys that are like, the greatest of all time, they're taking extremely modest salaries. So Jeff Bezos gets a salary of $82,000, so low that he actually qualified for the child tax credit, which he took. And, and he never takes more than that. And it's not just because
child tax credit.
And it's not because he's just a modest, humble guy, right? It's because he knows that salaries are for suckers, because salaries are subject to lots of taxes. They're subject to both income taxes and payroll taxes. And together, those taxes are frequently, over 50%. So they don't want anything to do with that. And so what they do is they don't take salaries, and instead they rely on the growing value of their stock. And the growth in value of their stock is extraordinary. Bezos, again, probably on his own, his stock has probably gone up $150 billion just since 2023. So you're talking about massive growth of wealth. The thing is, that growth of wealth also avoids taxes because we don't tax growing wealth until the property is sold, and our wealthiest Americans have found a way to access this property without actually selling it. And what that way is that they use it as collateral to borrow money. And all of our richest Americans have borrowed huge amounts of money to support their most lavish lifestyles. And what it means is that they are able to live off of this money without paying any taxes on it. Now, you're a state like California, and they have no salaries, they have no capital gains, they have no income, and yet they have massive amounts of wealth. And so, of course, the natural thing is to say, well, let's just tax them on their wealth. We know they have hundreds of billions of dollars, so let's tax their wealth much like one would tax a house, right? A house is taxed not because it produces income, but based on the value of the house. And that's what they're trying to do in California and in other places that have proposed adopting a wealth tax. It would be basically a 5% tax on all the property interests owned by the various taxpayers who fall into this group, which I think it's $1 billion is the current proposed cutoff for the California tax.
And so, Ray, let's talk about the California tax. I mean, why then is that a bad idea if it is? I mean, we're seeing a lot of billionaires taking their toys and leaving the state. Nevada, Miami Beach, Florida. And by the way, the reason this is proposed is that the healthcare union, the largest healthcare union in the state, looked at the state budget, saw that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is going to open up a massive hole in the state's Medi-Cal budget, and thought this is a reservoir of perhaps untapped wealth that we can access. So, are these state-led measures just a bad idea?
Yeah, there's a couple of problems with them. As I say, they are a totally understandable idea in theory, particularly when you're talking about people who own publicly traded stock, and we can easily see at least what that stock is worth. But there's a number of practical problems, particularly for states. One problem is, as we're already seeing, is that people can leave the state. Now, California is trying to get around it with this bill because they said anyone who is a citizen on January 1st, I think that was the cutoff date, where they are still going to be subject to this tax, even if they relocate. But I'd say a bigger problem comes with the valuation, and that's because when we have publicly traded stock, we can see that type of value, but lots of wealth is held not in publicly traded stock. And a lot of it is held, for example, in partnership interests that are highly complex, like 700 levels deep, partnerships, owning partnerships, and very, very difficult to track that value. And then add all the other types of things that people own. And the problem is for states is that states normally piggyback their systems on the federal government, right? The federal government figures out what your adjusted gross income is, and then the state just rides on that. With these wealth taxes, states are going to have to, on their own, put in all that they need to try to track value. And it's going to be a highly complex endeavor. And if we were to do it large scale, like on the national level, I think it would incentivize a lot of our wealthiest Americans to stay out of the publicly traded market and instead to stay in privately held business interests. And we already see that now, where a lot of private businesses are not going public. And this would give them one more reason to not go public. But when businesses pull out of the public market, that's not good for all of us who depend on the public market for our retirement and other savings.
I'm curious because I know a lot of countries have tried a wealth tax, because I love how you said salaries are for suckers. And it's true that a lot of the wealthiest people, especially, generational wealth, it gets tied up in properties, yachts, coin collections, things like that. So a lot of countries have tried to get at this, like France and Austria and Finland. They have all dropped this wealth tax. Like, they all backed away from it. Are the reasons that you're laying out why? I mean, did they have the same difficulty in assessing how much wealth was actually there and people potentially moving?
I think it's very difficult to capture everybody's wealth, the wealthy of the wealthiest people. I do think, and in Europe in particular, you have a lot of problems with people moving because, of course, you have freedom of movement, but without a unified system of taxation. And so, of course, people can easily move to lower tax jurisdictions. So it's particularly problematic in Europe. And, I think that if one were going to have a wealth tax system, it is going to involve sort of a whole new way of thinking about things that, frankly, at least in the United States, is kind of anathema to our way of thinking, just in terms of basic privacy, right? If people were forced to disclose every single thing they owned, I think that a lot of Americans, even those who weren't subject to the tax, might feel that that is too invasive of people's privacy. So I worry about that as well.
Ray, why are the politics around wealth taxes and taxing the wealthy, why are they so tricky, so hard fought, so bitterly emotional? It's something that we're seeing right now in California.
Well, I mean, of course, one reason is that the wealthy have a lot of firepower, right? And so now you're coming after them and they have a lot to say about it. So we've been seeing this more and more where the wealthiest are throwing their weight around in ways that I think culturally they were previously probably less inclined to do, right? They would be concerned about the wealthy throwing around their power, that this is maybe anti-democratic, but we're not in that age today. We may be in the future, but right now we're in the age that is embracing, throw around your weight, look out for number one. And it's almost like the greed is good. They say that every 40 years a time repeats itself. And so this is greed is good to the nth degree, I think, in the era that we're living in right now.
I mean, do you think that taxing trillionaires or taxing the super wealthy, is that something that is potentially doable?
So I think the first answer is to stop focusing on that we're taxing trillionaires, we're taxing billionaires, because I think that type of framing makes it sound like the rich are already paying a lot of taxes, and now we're going to impose extra burdens on them.
Yeah.
And so then it pushes us to have these kind of conversations that are like, are rich people good or bad for society? Do they bring jobs, or do they, all of this stuff? But that's really beside the point. I think the bigger problem is that the public at large has been duped about who pays taxes and how much taxes the wealthy actually pay. And so I think what's better is to say, wealthy people need to pay taxes just like the rest of us. Not that they need extra taxes that we're going to specifically impose on them, but we need to adjust our rules, because right now our rules allow the wealthy to acquire just exorbitant amounts of wealth entirely tax-free. And for them, it's optional, right? That's why you have to wonder, why do we hear things like when Elon Musk says, should I pay taxes or shouldn't I pay taxes, right? He asks his Twitter viewers. Or Warren Buffett says, well, I think I do better by not paying taxes, not paying down the national debt, and instead giving to my philanthropy. Somebody who earns a salary cannot make that decision that they're going to not pay taxes and instead donate to charity. So why are we letting our wealthy treat taxes as an option rather than as an obligation that we all have to share?
Is there any country that's really done a really good job of this, or is it just really tricky to tax people who have a lot of resources?
I don't think it's really tricky to tax. I don't think that's the actual problem. We easily could tax our wealthiest Americans by adopting one rule that was proposed by both Barack Obama and Richard Nixon, which was an odd pairing, right? Which was that we tax these gains at whenever the property is transferred. Instead of requiring sale, right, we should say when these people transfer their property by gifts, which they're doing a lot of gifting, or at death, they're going to recognize the gains then. And then the other thing that we need to do is to tax inheritances by pulling them into the income tax system, because inheritances right now are, the current estate tax system is so deeply flawed, it's not even a tax system. And then I think we could also adjust the rules of philanthropy, and then we'd have a system that I think does a pretty good job of treating everybody the same, bringing everybody into the tax system, and requiring everyone to contribute to supporting the costs of government.
Ray, before we let you go, I mean, these failures in the tax code have been around for decades. Warren Buffett wrote the famous 2011 New York Times op-ed pointing out that his secretary paid a higher tax rate than he did. So, I mean, is there any reason to think that maybe this California ballot proposition, despite its flaws, becomes a kind of inciting moment where we can have a kind of more clear-eyed and rational discussion about how the rich pay taxes?
Absolutely. Because I think one great thing about this California, and frankly the other states that are doing it, is that it's really shining a light on the fact that the wealthiest Americans are in fact not paying taxes and don't have to pay taxes. And so this moves the needle forward, right? Instead of having confusion, like are the rich paying a lot of taxes or not, you don't really see those discussions. Mostly people say, oh yeah, the rich aren't paying taxes, and how are we going to address it as a problem? So I actually think, while I'm not in particular favor of this wealth tax, I think it is a very positive change for getting a fairer tax system, because it's opening up conversations just like this, where we actually see how the wealthy avoid taxes because they avoid taxes on their salaries and on their gains and on their inheritances.
So, Stacey, my takeaway is that we're the suckers earning salaries,
I know,
paying our taxes.
That's gonna haunt me. Salaries are for suckers is gonna haunt me.
Well, Ray, thank you for bringing that to our attention, and thanks for being here as a guest on Everybody's Business.
Thank you so much. Wonderful being here.
Thank you, Ray. Okay, Brad, let us set the trillionaires aside for the moment to talk about a slightly different topic, although another cohort that does command an enormous economic power.
With perhaps just as much mystique as the trillionaires. Gen
Yes.
Alpha, Stacey. So kids between the ages of, I guess, just born and around 16. We have a whole package in the current issue of Businessweek about Generation Alpha as a potent economic force.
One of the really surprising things about Gen Alpha is that even though most of them aren't earning their own money yet, a lot of them are commanding a lot of money or wielding a lot of economic power within their families. I mean, I know you have children, Brad, or how much control do they have over how your family spends money?
They're a little older. They're not Gen Alpha, but I would say, Stacey, they have all the control. And
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Over where you guys go on vacation, what you eat.
Let's just say
streaming services.
Let's just say they're formidable. But the thing about, Gen Alpha, they get interested earlier in cultural trends, in beauty products, and influencers. And so they are a force that companies have to understand.
Well, Brad, before Max whisked off to the Olympics, we did have a conversation about Gen Alpha. Both of us wrote articles for the Gen Alpha issue, and Max actually talked to his children for the story, and we learned all kinds of things about this generation, its economic muscle, and also some of the traits that it's starting to show, which, of course, companies and people everywhere are very interested in.
Very curious to hear what you found out.
Let's roll the tape.
I am as you know, Stacey, a very serious journalist. And so in preparation for this segment, I went out and I did some reporting. I gathered some important tape with some important Gen Alphas that I know. This is my daughter, Alice, her best friend, Olive, and then my son, Saul. These are ages 11, 10, and 9. So the sweet spot of Gen Alpha. And I wanted to just ask them, okay, what do you guys think is cool? Because to your point,
this is a million corporations are asking. This is a very expensive question.
Discretionary spending. What I have is so valuable. The CEOs of some of the most important and valuable companies.
Selling this information.
I
and
could
you're just
be
giving it to us for free.
On everybody's
incredibly
business.
Generous.
So let's give a listen. This is sort of a quick focus group on some trends that are big or not big among the alphas.
All right. Minecraft and Roblox.
Roblox bad. Minecraft okay.
Taylor Swift.
Slay.
Bad Bunny.
Good artist.
Kid Rock.
I have no idea what that is.
How would I know?
Pokemon.
Too old for them.
Millennials.
What?
I don't know what that is.
iPads.
Okay.
Eh.
TikTok.
Don't doom scroll, kids. Horrible poison for your brain.
Cybertrucks.
Garbage trucks.
6, 7.
Boo. That's over.
Cat's eye.
Awesome.
Sucks.
Skinny jeans.
No, they squish my legs.
Boba tea.
Boba tea. Gnarly.
Is gnarly good or bad?
You didn't catch that reference? That's from a Cat's Eye song called Gnarly. And it's
okay.
also
I
big
did
with
not
the
get that.
kids. And gnarly, it could be good or bad. It means awesome. It means gross. It means all the things. They love boba tea, though, I can tell you. Now, I got to say, so you reacted to my kids talking about technology and saying that, Instagram, and Olive said the same thing, Instagram, TikTok, poison.
Poison for your brain.
So I wrote about this.
This is not wrong.
I wrote about this in the latest issue of Businessweek, and I really think that this idea that alphas are the most online generation, you see this show up all the time. It even shows up sometimes in surveys. I don't know that that's totally true, or it may be missing a part of the story, because it's true that although alphas do have a lot of screen time, and you brought up COVID, this time where all these kids were just basically plugged into screens 24/7, but they've also kind of internalized a lot of the skepticism about screens that their parents have as well. And I hear that in my own house. And this is the thing I wanted to write about, which is I read a lot about parents and children getting into fights about screen time. And the way it's always described is a parent saying that I am in a big fight with my kid about screen time. They will not get off TikTok at the dining room table. And these kids are often a little bit older than my kids. But the big fight in my house over screen time is my kids yelling at me. And they're the ones being get off your phone, Dad, get off your phone. And I really think, and it shows up in some of the surveys, so there's some Pew data about kids' feelings about social media. And a few years ago, 3 years ago, it was kids thought that social media was basically good. And it is totally flipped, where now the numbers say just the opposite. I should pull this up really quick. 2022, they asked teenagers, is social media mostly good or mostly bad for people your age? And at the time, 32% said that it was mostly bad. 24% said that it was mostly good. So slightly negative. Today, 11% mostly good. 48% mostly bad. So basically, a lot of kids are at least aware of this. That doesn't necessarily mean
that they're not doing
it. But I think this is something that big companies are going to have to reckon with, not only because kids may not be quite as brain poisoned as their parents. Like, I think our generation, especially maybe people a little younger than you and I, who really grew up on the internet, I think we are the ones maybe who have like the least healthy habits around screens, whereas some of these quote unquote digital natives are actually maybe a little bit better able to kind of compartmentalize. And then you also have, all of these countries are passing laws now. So Australia just passed a rule saying kids under 16 are not allowed to use social media. Spain is doing it. The UK is doing it. A lot of US states are doing it. There is a shift happening. And I don't think any of us really know where it's going to go.
I wonder what AI is going to throw into this mix, because I do think just the way people are interacting with AI now, maybe not such young kids, but maybe older alphas, because people have like very personal conversations with AI or ask it advice.
Yeah. When I was reporting this story, I talked to John Haidt, who is the author of The Anxious Generation, which is this like best-selling book. He's an NYU social psychologist. And he's like the guy who created a lot of the kind of conversation going on right now around screen time. And he says essentially that AI is like social media, but a million times worse, because part of the problem with social media for kids and for development is that it kind of like takes kids away from like human connections. But with AI, there's no connection at all. It's just a bot making stuff up.
Well, you're connecting, but maybe not with a human.
Yeah. And so, he's told me, I think it's the worst way you could possibly bring up a kid. I do think those concerns are out there. And unlike with social media, where there was like a 10-year period where pretty much tech companies did whatever they wanted. They were marketing Facebook and Instagram to very young children. And there was an effort that was that it kind of got derailed, but they even wanted to go, younger than 13. They were going to have like 9-year-olds on these social media platforms, which when you think about it, I don't know, as a parent, it seems kind of crazy. The conversation now is very different. I also will say, when I talk to my kids about AI, they don't like AI. They think it's dumb. And maybe this is partly because they're my kids and they hear my AI skepticism, but I don't know that that's totally true. I think a lot of kids are actually kind of aware of the limitations. I was talking the other day with my daughter Alice and one of her friends, and they were saying, oh, it would have been so great to grow up in the 80s. And I was like, why? Why would it be so great to grow up in the 80s? And they said, well, you could go to movie theaters, and talking about these kind of retro experiences. Alice is super into CDs, which is funny. And then she goes, yeah, your generation's so lucky. And I said, why? And she goes, well, you haven't had your brains poisoned by AI. And I said, well, Alice, you don't have to use AI. And she goes, it's everywhere. I try to search for a fat frog on Google and I get a bunch of AI. She was really disturbed by the fact that the Google results for fat frog was AI.
I now want to Google fat frog, but I think she's right in that, because companies are adopting it, it may be hard to not use it. And then when you start using it, it may be hard to not kind of veer into a more personal relationship. But also, maybe there's more of an awareness now than there was when social media started, because that was such a new thing. And maybe there wasn't as much of an awareness. Also, I think because you were connecting with other people, maybe there was less of a warning flags going off, because, there have been like a million movies and books about Rise of the Robots.
I do think that the kind of screen anxiety, the Jonathan Haidt view of the world, is seeping into kids. When I called him, he told me, if you had called me 3 or 4 weeks ago, I would have told you your kids are freaks. But he had actually just released like a kid's version of his book. It's called The Amazing Generation. It's a graphic novel. And it's, surprisingly, it's sold pretty well. And there are all these Amazon reviews of kids being like, I hope I never get a smartphone and things like that. So it may be that kids really have these kind of retro values, or maybe just absorbing from us, the parents.
I feel like there can be a gap between knowing what's good for you and doing what's good for you. And AI makes certain things so easy, including writing papers, doing research. I feel like that's going to be really hard to, I mean, it's like, it's so awesome to have a flip phone, or it's awesome to grayscale your phone until you are on deadline.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because even in this Pew survey where kids are saying it's bad for their peers, they don't think they are using it badly. So there is a bit of a, now.
I'm personally not addicted to it. I feel like it's like the thing with the glass of wine.
Exactly.
It's like, I mean, I have a glass of wine every night, but that's totally different.
But you know what? Like, these public health campaigns, they work sometimes. And as I have been thinking.
Did Say No to Drugs work?
No, but Say No to Smoking absolutely worked. I mean,
eventually. Yeah, eventually it did.
And when I've thought about the conversations that I have at the dinner table with my kids around screen time, they really, really remind me of conversations I had with my parents and members of my parents' generation about cigarettes, where I was getting all of this kind of anti-tobacco information at school and coming home and being like, you shouldn't smoke, and that worked. I mean, you look at the generational shift on smoking, and it's been profound. Like,
but a big part of the generational shift on smoking had to do with taxes.
Sure, but it has made a difference. And talking to John Haidt about this, what he said is, and where he kind of compared it, he said, one of the things I think that really worked on cigarette smoking was in the late 90s, the sort of anti-tobacco groups, they started sort of demonizing the tobacco industry and saying it wasn't really about your health. It was about these tobacco companies are manipulating you. They are selling you an addictive product. They are making money off of you. And I think there's some research showing that marketing that happened in the late 90s was effective. And he thinks that some of the messaging around tech that's pretty similar. That's all about, Mark Zuckerberg's trying to addict you to your phone or whatever. Just like you heard in my daughter and her friend's statement, like, it's poison. They're tricking you. Like that sense of a big company getting one over on you is a message that maybe could potentially break through among teens and younger kids.
Brad, it is that time in the show when we talk about underrated stories of the week. And you brought us an underrated story. What is your story for us?
Well, Stacey, is Steven Colbert really ever underrated?
I like him. I think he is very often underrated.
I do too. I think we'll be feeling the reverberations from this week's events for a long time. First, on Monday, he went on his program, The Late Show, as you probably heard, and said lawyers at CBS, his bosses, had blocked him from airing an interview with U.S. Senate candidate from Texas, James Tallarico.
Yes. And from what I understand, he still did get the interview out into the world. He uploaded it on YouTube, and it has been viewed 7 million times.
Then I was told, in some uncertain terms, that not only could I not have him on, I could not mention me not having him on. And because my network clearly doesn't want us to talk about this, let's talk about this.
Stacey, this is a three-way battle. Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr, who you might remember as Jimmy Kimmel's foil, is trying to enforce those old equal time rules on the public airwaves. So if you have one candidate, you need to give time to their opposition. CBS is saying they didn't force Tallarico off the air and simply insist they gave The Late Show options for how to fulfill those equal time obligations. And Colbert, who is set to end his show on May, I think he just doesn't give AF at this point. He went on the air again this week and said every word of a script was approved by CBS lawyers, and he's fighting.
Well, I mean, I have to say the big winner in all of this is James Tallarico, who says after this interview went viral on YouTube, his campaign raised $2.5 million in 24 hours. Which is just mind-blowing.
Right. And that's a way I think the story could be underrated. He's competing for Senator John Cornyn's seat. He is studying to be a Presbyterian minister. He went on Ezra Klein's podcast. You can kind of see the Democrats falling in love with Tallarico, and this incident this week is only going to raise his profile.
I also feel like there's something maybe a larger theme going on here, too, but about the media and the Trump administration. I mean, we just had huge layoffs at the Washington Post. Like you said, Jimmy Kimmel's also had a big run-in with the administration. It's really interesting to see the administration quite directly engaging with the media in a lot of cases. Although it's unclear if that actually happened here, it's definitely a theme right now.
Right. I mean, the question is, are they trying to enforce fairness on the public airways, or is this a partisan agenda? And I think that question has all sorts of impacts, including in the battle over Warner Brothers, which could go to Netflix, could go to Paramount, and of course owns CNN. So this is the only beginning of this kind of fight.
This show is produced by Stacey Wong and Jasmine J.T. Green. Magnus Hendrickson is our supervising producer. Sam Rogich handles engineering, and Dave Purcell fact checks. Special thanks to Jeff Muskus, Julia Rubin, Maria Ling, and Angel Recchio. If you have a minute, please rate and review the show. It means a lot to us. And if you have a story that should be our business, send us an email. everybody's@bloomberg.net. That's everybody's with an S at bloomberg.net. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.